All right, aloha everyone, and thank you for joining us today of the the makeup for domestic violence 101 training series. Today is Dynamics of Domestic Violence, Recognition, Role, and Response. Today's presenter is Sanoe Ka'aihue, who is the Executive Director of Women Helping Women. Before we get started, just want to go through some slides and some Zoom housekeeping for today. First, I want to thank the organizers of this training series, the Hawaii State Department of Health, Hawaii State Department of Human Services, Hawaii State Judiciary, the AG's Department of the AG, as well as Hawaii Public Health Institute. Here is some funding acknowledgement for putting on this training series from the Hawaii State Judiciary and the Hawaii State Department of the Attorney General, Department of Health, as well as DHS. Also like to thank our sponsors for providing continuing education credits for this training series, the Hawaii Public Health Training Hui, Western Region Public Health Training Center, and the Public Health Learning Network. First, some Zoom housekeeping. All participants, you are muted upon entry. For questions or comments, please utilize the chat box or the Q&A box located in the bottom of your screens. This session is being recorded right now, and it will be posted on the Hawaii Public Health Training Hui's YouTube channel, and will be shared with you folks following this series today, or sorry, the session today. The remaining sessions will not be recorded. Okay, so just want to put today because we have a makeup. We have provided continuing education credits for the following topics: CHES, registered dietitians, licensed social workers, substance abuse counselors, and prevention specialists, as well as legal credits. For obtaining those credits, folks who are registered, because this is a makeup session, folks who registered for today and are unable to attend, everyone is getting their 2 hours. But in order to obtain the credits for the remaining series, you must attend the following 2 sessions, which is this Friday as well as next Friday. The feedback surveys will be emailed out to folks today following this training with the 1 week to complete. For folks who are calling in, please email me at makamai@hifi.org with your name and the phone number that you used today. And certificates of attendance will all be emailed out by November 4th. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce our guest trainer for today. Sanoe is a former engineering major with the Running Rebels of University of Nevada in Las Vegas. This Maui native started her work in domestic violence in 2013 with Women Helping Women as a temporary restraining order advocate, supporting victims of court and legal advocacy. In March 2016, she assumed the role of deputy director, where she managed and operated Maui and Lanai's only emergency domestic violence shelters for women and children. These days, Sanoe leads the charge as the executive director alongside 24 dynamic advocates, creating safety and support for survivors, working closely with other first responders in domestic violence, and bringing awareness through events and presentations to Maui County, the state of Hawaii, and beyond. So without further ado, I'd like to hand it over to Sanoe.
Hi, good morning, everybody. Sorry, the hair's looking kind of crazy this morning, but welcome. I just want to say thank you so much. I know all the, we're just talking about retrograde and all the Gatorades and all those things happening last week, but it's my pleasure to be here yet again. And we're just going to hold this presentation. But before we get started, let me pull up my actual presentation. So for those that were here last week, and I'm so appreciative to the group and to you folks for being flexible during what seems like a sporadic amount of events that happened throughout that day. But yes, my name is Sanoe Ka'aihue, and I am so glad to be here and presenting what is sort of the beginning of what you're going to experience for the next 2 other sessions. So this one will just kind of help lay the groundwork for you folks and be ready for the next 2 sessions. So let's get into it. So I will give you guys kind of a brief history of Women Helping Women, and go through the definitions of domestic violence as well as the signs of abuse. And we're going to talk a little bit about lethality and risk assessments. And I'm going to talk a little bit more and give you a bit more information about how to respond to DV, especially in the general public and, just kind of in your own personal life if things like that sort of come up for you. And with this presentation, as well as the other presentations, we're going to use pronouns like she and her to refer to victims, survivors, and he and him to refer to abusers and batterers. But as we all know, those kind of interchange as things sort of progress. So it's not to say that women cannot be abusers or that men cannot be victims. It's just that these are the terminologies that are commonly used. I'm just going to ask you guys to be present. I got 2 sets of drinks here, so please feel free to do what you need to do in order to be present during this time. Practicing self-care. So if you guys don't know how to do self-care, if you have, any questions about that, I'm more than happy to expand on that outside of this training. We will have one break, and it's going to be much needed. So I encourage you folks to take that really long break, step away from your computer. We'll have time for Q&A at the end of this presentation. So any questions that you have, hold on to them. And we'll have, again, a long period of time to have some Q&A so we can really get into it. And I really want to hear what you folks have to say. And hopefully, I don't claim to have all the answers, but I will give you the answers that I have in my toolbox. And whatever I don't know, I promise to address it and hopefully give you guys some answers to that. So it's a little bit about me. I'm going to go through this part pretty quick, but I have 3 beautiful children. I'm, also this is my board of directors, and I really enjoy having them. They're a great group. We meet quite a bit, and I love each of them. And this is some of my staff, and this was at our last Christmas party that we were finally able to gather together. So I've been doing this work now for about 9 years, and it doesn't get easier by any stretch of hearing trauma and all of these things. But what gets easier is that I have good team members in place. I have a great board in place. I have solid family roots that I have settled down. I'm from Maui, and so most of my family lives here. But yeah, that's a little bit about me. In my off time when I'm not working, I'm doing lots of other things. I volunteer quite a bit elsewhere and throughout the community just to help, lots of homeless programs, those kinds of things. So I barely get any sleep. So sometimes it looks like I sleep in my office. And so Women Helping Women. So we've been established in this county since 1977. It actually started as a very small group of women that put together and saw that a lot of the women that were seeking help were victims of domestic violence, including those advocates that initially started. Right now, I have a staff of 24, and we operate Maui's only 24-hour crisis DV hotline. And like I said last week, those phone calls stay within our county. So, while this number is posted up worldwide and it's spread like throughout the nation, throughout the world, it's a global number, and people have called it from everywhere, such as like Egypt. We've gotten calls from Europe, from pretty much a lot of spaces. But when they do call it, it's an actual advocate that lives here. It's one of my advocates. Sometimes it's me. And it's truly 24 hours. So hurricanes, all that stuff, tsunami warnings, all of that, we're still answering hotline calls. And our offices right now are located in Wailuku. That's our main office. That's where we focus most of our services outside of emergency shelter. We have an office in Lahaina as well as Hana and on the island of Lanai. Both our Hana and Lanai offices kind of serve as a stopgap shelter. So what it is like if we have a family or a woman that needs to be in shelter, but is not able because of transportation or time of night, those kinds of things, that they need to be safe for the evening, for the night. We'll house them there for the night and then, make arrangements to bring them to where our main shelter is, which is undisclosed. And we only, we operate the only DV shelters on Maui and Lanai. So as far as Molokai goes, they do have a shelter program there that is not run by us, but we do work closely with them as well as the outer islands. So, while people think that a lot of services are mostly Oahu centric, there's a lot of programs that are on the outer islands as well. And so Angelina Mercado, who is not on this presentation today, but she runs the Hawaii State Coalition Against Domestic Violence. And so we're all interconnected in some way in order to move people from one safe shelter to another safe shelter. So we work really well together. And I'll give you guys a little bit of those resources at the end of this. And we also, as I said, so it's not just emergency shelter that we provide. We do provide court advocacy. We do provide transitional housing and client support. So that's like kind of the aftercare for emergency shelter. So the court advocacy, the TROs, temporary restraining orders, those things are really the crisis, the major crisis parts. And so transitional housing and client support helps them move on to something outside of their domestic violence relationships. And we also provide individual and group survivor counseling. So one of the amazing things about COVID that transpired over the last couple of years is that we were more able to utilize Zoom for our group and individual counseling. In fact, our individual and group counselor, one of them, she actually lives on Oahu, and she is a retiree from our organization. But we contacted her, let her know that her information is still, her knowledge is so strong in this program. She was one of the founding members. And so, we invited her to still be kind of a consultant for us, and she's more than happy to do that. And also in terms of emergency shelter, so our shelter is for women and children. As far as men go, because we know men need shelter as well, what we do is we'll assess them and make sure that they fit the criteria of domestic violence, intimate partner violence, those kinds of situations. And then we have other avenues to be able to house them in safe shelter. So it's not to say that we never house men or anything like that. We just have a different avenue for them. All right. So how is domestic violence defined? Because that's going to be what sets the pace for everything else in this series. So it is exactly what it sounds like. It is a pattern of abusive behavior in any relationship that is used by one partner to gain or maintain power and control. So if there's any word or phrase that you take away from this presentation, it's power and control. Because without the power and control, the abuse is different. And we're going to talk a little about that. And this happens over intimate partners. This happens for family or household members. It's that maintaining of power and control. So that is crucial to what we're talking about today. And with that, when people hear power and control, it doesn't necessarily trigger things of domestic violence, but the bulk of the idea with that is that victims are forced to change their behavior in response to abuse. So, I'll give you examples of that and we'll talk about that in the next couple of slides. But in terms of power and control and all of those things and DV, what we're seeing is that people are also calling it intimate terrorism. So if you've ever heard that term, they're talking about domestic violence. They're talking about power and control. So like I said, we talk about domestic violence. I gave you a brief definition of what that is. But we're also going to see how that pairs against situational violence, because we know that there's a difference between the two. Both happen to intimate partners, but there's a difference between what is situational and what is domestic violence. So the major difference is that situational violence is generally specific to the situation. So I give you an example. What we hear a lot is that there's a lot of couples that are going through breakup and they're going through divorce. What the missing element in the difference between situational and domestic violence is the lack of the power and control. So you have both parties that are both physically, not physically, but emotionally, psychologically abusive to each other. So it's an equal type of violence. It can escalate to being violent, physically violent, but it's because of a situation and not because of chronic abuse. So we're going to talk about, that sort of cycle of abuse, but situational violence happens between couples. It happens between family members. It'll happen between friends, those kinds of things. So it only stays within that situation. So yeah, for me, when I think of situational violence, I often think of couples that are going through a divorce where both parties are they're going at each other. But once the divorce happens, then it tends to sort of settle away on its own because both parties hopefully move their separate ways and go forward with whatever their life looks like. Also for people experience a breakup, boyfriend, girlfriend, or any intimate relationship that ends, sometimes there's one party that definitely wants to end the relationship while others do not. So again, it's relative to the situation. And yeah, couples on vacation too. So we see a lot of that. When couples go on vacation, I will tell you that it becomes challenging, especially if it's a new relationship. We get a lot of calls from the front desks of resorts saying that, this couple, they just got here, they've been drinking, and then all their problems come out in one whole session right there in that situation. So while it is sad and it can be somewhat violent and, there's a lot of shouting, a lot of screaming, those kinds of things, it's just relative to the situation. Once we get down and talking to both sides, both the victim and the abuser, we can tell that this situation has just been something where, it just happened because they were drinking or those kinds of things. Hopefully that makes sense for everybody. I will say that, of course, domestic violence is the leading cause of homicide for women. So that's a very high statistic. 2 out of 3 female homicide victims are killed by a family member or intimate partner. And that's true. That's a statistic from last year. And so we know that it is very dangerous to be in a domestic violence relationship and all of these things. So let's talk about what power and control actually is and what it actually contains. And so for us, as service providers, we've been using the power and control wheel for many, many years. It has not changed over the course of the years. And it was developed by the Domestic Abuse Intervention Project in Duluth, Minnesota. So yeah, there was a group of women that got together, a group of providers that got together, and we're taking a look at why these women, why these men were being abused and what sort of leads up to that. Like, what were the components that made up those relationships? And then having those conversations, they figured out that there are all these pieces to this pie that makes up that cycle of violence. So, for us, we use this. It has changed a little bit over the years, but only in terms of adding, say immigrants that are being abused. We are looking at also the LGBTQ plus community that is also included in this power and control wheel. So when you go down on the internet, you'll find a bunch of these types of power and control wheels, and they all have the similar sounding, which is, what we're about to go into. They do have an equality wheel, which I always keep up. But for my advocates, oftentimes they'll show this wheel to their survivors that come in that are just like, well, he only yells at me. I sometimes, feel fearful, and they're not sure. They don't know what to call the abuse, right? They don't know that it's abuse by any stretch. So oftentimes when we show our survivors this power and control wheel, they'll identify with almost everything on this wheel. So power and control. So on that wheel, we have all of these factors that go into creating that power and control dynamic, right? So of course, if there's physical abuse happening, you're going to see that. That's the outward expression of this power and control. What you don't see, though, is a lot of the intimidation that happens. So when an abuser wants to control their victim, oftentimes they've been so physically abusive enough that almost the leading up to the physical abuse, and a survivor will know what that is. So when you talk to a survivor, they'll tell you, well, I feel really intimidated. Like, I know, because he's been so physically abusive, that when he talks or behaves a certain way, I know that that's going to equal physical abuse. I know that, I'm scared enough, and I know him well enough that there's going to be an escalation. Same with the emotional abuse. So I always tell people the emotional abuse and the gaslighting are the hardest things to combat with survivors, because it's so internal, right? Like, if you've ever been a negative self-talker, if you've known somebody that has had mental health issues or anxiety or any of those things, depression, that comes, that's harder than trying to fix physical stuff. You can go to the doctor, you can get examined, you can go and treat the physical outward portions, but the emotional is really tough, and that takes many years, and some survivors never get through it. And it's a work in progress, and every day is a new day, a new opportunity to help them through that. Oftentimes too, what you'll see or hear is that the abusers are using finances to control their victims. So when you hear, and I often hear all the time, is that he made me open a bank account with him, or we got a credit card together, or he told me that I could put all my money in this account and I don't need my own separate account, or he told me that I don't need to work because he'll take care of me fully. And so what that does is eliminates the method of which people can get a means to be able to leave if they wanted to, right? It takes away a certain amount of power. It takes away a certain amount of control. What you'll see too is that there's lots of coercion and threats. So that kind of goes hand in hand with the intimidation part. So you'll see a lot of times abusers will threaten their victims. They will try to coerce them to do something that is perhaps maybe against the law. You'll see, I see it a lot in the houseless community, where you'll have an abuser that says, you better go into that store and take and steal and do all this stuff. And then if not, I'm going to physically beat you, right? So we see a lot of those that come through our program as well. And, while that's again, that's one of those things that, is harder to break off, harder to get past when a survivor wants to leave her relationship. If they have kids together, gosh, like as a mom, I would never leave my children in an abusive situation, right? And I speak as a survivor as well. So my kids were very, very little, and, I wanted to leave the relationship, but I was not willing to leave my kids behind. And so a lot of what the abusers know is that, yeah, she won't leave because I have the kids. I have control of the kids. And so she'll stay because not only do I have the kids, but she doesn't have any money to go anywhere. She feels really bad about herself. She doesn't think she's worthy of leaving it. She doesn't know how she'll live without me. And she knows that I'll hit her, that if she does leave, I could physically harm her. And so too, that goes with male privilege. And I know, regardless of what anyone thinks, we still live in that patriarchal, men still earn more money than women. kind of society. And it's sad to say, because if you're a Native Hawaiian like I am, you know, our culture wasn't that way prior to being established, right, in the United States. But that still holds true. Like, there's still lots of male privilege. Things have sort of equaled out. They're getting a little bit more balanced, but there's still that little push, that little leverage that males have. Even for, you know, things like, and it was like in the 1930s, 40s, where it was like you're the master of the castle, right? You watch Leave It to Beaver or something like that. You have the moms who are stay-at-home moms, they take care of the kids. And when the husband comes home, she has a drink ready, she has dinner ready, everything is set, right? So that's, and he didn't have to say that, right? That was just the society, that was the way it was built, that was the culture of that time. So in terms of male privilege, like, you know, we still live in that, regardless of how many steps we've made in the right direction, right, to equalize that. But abusers are very good at using that to control their victims. There's a lot of minimizing, denying and blaming, and that too goes along with gaslighting. And gaslighting, I will tell you, is probably one of the more destructive ways that abusers gain power and control over their victims. So it creates that actual and assumed power for the abuser. And so gaslighting, we're going to spend a little bit of time talking about this because I think it's worth it. There's a lot that's happened in our society currently that, you know, constitutes having more say about gaslighting. You'll hear it more and more, especially in the media. But it's a twisting of the perception of the victim's reality. So, and it installs plenty of that self-doubt, plenty of that unworthiness. Narcissists are pros at that. That is their bread and butter when it comes to being an abuser. You know, you'll hear a lot like, you made me do this to you, or, you know, that triggers me, why would you do it? And so it's sort of flipping the script, right? Like, if you've ever had or have experienced a narcissist who wants to be the center of attention, who wants to be the perfect person, who puts on a good, charming show in front of people. And we hear that a lot. Abusers are very charming in the public, but what you don't see is the other part of that behind closed doors. And so the media, like I said, has been really good about bringing this to light a little bit more. I love Netflix, and sometimes I watch too much of it, but this I will recommend, and people have done sort of study guides on this show right here, Made. So if you haven't watched it, I suggest you watch it, at least the first few episodes, because it does give an accurate description of what it's like for a victim to leave, what it's like for a victim to go into shelter, what it's like for a victim to try and obtain housing and try and get ahead, try to move on, try to go through the legal system. So this is a very, I would say almost, 80 to 90% true for the most part. And watch the first few episodes if you can. You don't have to watch the whole thing, but it does give you a very good inside look as to what that is. Tinder Swindler. Oh my gosh. That show really broke my heart, because a lot of those women, they believe this guy's story. And so at some point you can tell he flips the script when people called him out, when he was actually called out on his narcissism, right? And then who doesn't know the R. Kelly story? I was one that was very grateful that they finally arrested him, and they brought these ladies and these gentlemen some much needed justice. But if you haven't watched that series, it's kind of a tough one to watch. So, I would suggest putting, young kids anywhere in there, of course, with all three of these movies, but this is a good one that gives you an idea and the behavior of a narcissist, extreme narcissist. So those are my recommendations if you're looking for some easy watching. I don't know, but it's something that will give you an idea of what gaslighting looks like. And you know, if you've watched and if you're a little older like I am, Sleeping with the Enemy is always a great one. And it'll tell you exactly what I mean about the intimidation parts, what I mean about gaslighting, and all of that narcissistic behavior. So I'm just going to put a few statistics out there. And in doing some of these slides, I realized that this number has kind of shifted. So it is still true, though, that 1 in 4 women report having experienced severe physical violence by their partner. And the statistic here is more along the lines of 1 in 6. So what we're seeing now is that things are sort of evening out. So with the introduction of more training, with the introduction of more awareness, with the introduction of gender equity and racial equity, these numbers have kind of grown a little bit more closer in terms of the statistics, but still staggering if you think about it. And of course, 1 in 5 women and 1 in 12 men report having been stalked by an intimate partner. And I hear a lot from ladies that tell me, especially over the years, I started, of course, in the temporary restraining order advocate. I was going to court and hearing these horrific stories of how abusers spoofed their phone calls, right? So you can do a lot of that. That's been for years now, but they'll track these women on their phones. They'll create false phone numbers. They'll create false identities just to ruin what a woman, just to continue abusing them is what I should say. So, you know, and then it's harder to track. Like years ago when I first started, they weren't quite sure on how this happened, right? Like you have judges and court systems that are unaware of how, because media and because technology changes quickly, you know, we had to go in and educate more of the judicial system on how this works and what this looks like. And, you know, we did that with our police department as well, because that is, the officers, again, were like unaware on how, because they're only seeing what they see in front of them. But, you know, for a lot of our ladies, there were things like LoJack put on their cars, so they were being tracked. We've had to move people, and for whatever reason, their abusers will still find them, will still track them and find them somehow. And so while technology is awesome, like I love my iPhone, but realistically, I could track a lot of people. I could track my kids, and it's safe. It's safe in some ways, but it makes an abuser, you know, give them a little bit more access to you, which is what we're trying to prevent when a survivor wants to leave that relationship. So what are the signs? Because we'll see a lot of signs. We know, and you know, I shared a little bit about that power and control. I shared a little bit about, you know, how the abuser uses that. But what does that look like? What does that look like to me? What does that look like to you? So for me, first off the bat, if this is my mom, if this is my sister, if this is my grandma, if this is my good friend, my best friend, I would notice, first of all, their changes in their personality. I have friends that are extremely bubbly, and if that switched, if they were in this power and control dynamic, their behavior might go in the complete opposite way. So they might be a little bit more closed off. They don't come and hang out with you anymore. They make excuses like, oh no, I gotta go do such and such with my husband, with my boyfriend. And that's all good and well. Like, I think, you know, of course, like people get into relationships and they're gonna hang out with their other halves. But where it's triggering and where it's a red flag is when there's the changes in their personality, the core of who they are changes dramatically. That's going to be a humongous sign for especially me, but especially for you folks too. If there's physical injuries, of course, like black eyes, bruising, weird bruising, bruises in areas where, you know, you don't think you could fall down and get hurt in that way, in that area. Asking those simple questions or just noticing, taking notice. Like, I'm a very curious and observant person. So for me, I ask a lot of questions, and I oftentimes call that sort of the gift of discernment or gift of suspicion. So it's one of those things that we kind of joke about in the office, is that as an advocate, oftentimes you'll have this gift of suspicion. You know, you'll see sometimes, and if it's a really close friend to you, you'll notice that they're maybe anxious or depressed, and they don't really have a reason for it, or they don't give you a reason for it. You know, you could be concerned and ask, but they don't offer any explanation as to why that anxiety or that depression is going on with them. For me, when I was in an abusive relationship, the major thing was that I had a lot of anxiety, I had a lot of depression, I had major changes in personality. My abuser was not physically harmful to me, but the emotional stuff, my coworkers noticed that I had a major change in my personality. And, you know, and the anxiety and depression. And same with all of these, right? So they become isolated, withdrawn. Again, you got a severe extrovert, and then they become immediately like introverted over the course of time, and you don't see them out anymore. You don't hear from them anymore. It's good to check on those people and make sure that they're doing okay. If it's your coworker, sometimes they'll frequently be late or miss work often. Or they'll come up with excuses as to why they're missing work often. And, you know, as a supervisor, as somebody who works with or has people that you oversee, you know, those are the things you're going to notice. And perhaps, like, I know a lot of supervisors, not necessarily in this sector, but in other avenues, right? They'll immediately just kind of write it off and sort of cut them off from work, right? Like fire them, instead of having a conversation, a separate conversation, a safe conversation with them about, you know, maybe the reasoning. And if you're noticing all these other things, changes in personality, all of that, it's worth it to ask a good question, and hopefully giving people a safe space to be able to do that is going to be key to making sure that they can share with you. Oh, this one we see a lot too, is that their partners will frequently show up to their workplace, call, or jeopardize their job in some way. So we're working with a survivor now who just got fired from her job because her partner came to her workplace and made threats to her boss and her coworkers, and went in there and was constantly coming in there. So her boss said, you know what, we're done, we're afraid. And instead of helping the survivor, they decided to let her go, which is technically against the law. So in case you guys didn't know, that is against the law. You cannot fire somebody because they're going through domestic violence. So, you know, we're working with her on that. But yeah, this is the 4th job now that she's been fired from because of domestic abuse, because of her abuser. And so that is, you know, while these are some of the signs, these are just some, right? For me, I trust my intuition a lot, and I have to rely on my intuition. So if I'm working with my coworker and I notice things are so different, for me, because I work with people so much, I can kind of tell when they're not having a great day. I can kind of tell when things are off. And so, you know, it's good for us to be mindful of that and to find a space that we can be safe and that we can share with them about what's happening in their life. And it's not to say that, you know, we have a fix it and a fix all for everything. But if you notice some things, and women are really good at this, of having like this really good intuition, and we tend to trust our intuition quite a bit. Again, the gift of suspicion, the gift of discernment, all of those things, like we we try and build that up because we know and we see these red flags. And I'll tell you that it's interesting when you go to a space where there's people that don't do this work, right? And you're just like out and about in the community, and you're like just hearing these triggering things that will trigger your ears to be like more alert, and you'll see red flags popping up everywhere. But you know, you're in public and you can't exactly like just start blasting out DV, power control tactics and all of these things. So it gets really interesting when you're working with survivors, and you know, it's all about making sure that we can preserve what we have in terms of survivors, safety, and all of that. But I will tell you that my family has a history of being survivors and being in abusive relationships. So I've seen it happen across the board with my mom. I've seen it happen with my grandmother. I've heard stories about, you know, it happening to my great grandmother. And so for us, what we're trying to do is shift that culture. We're trying to shift that in the work that we do. And it's come from many, many years of just learning and understanding. I think the biggest thing is this isolation part, because we don't want survivors to be isolated. We want to be sure that we can draw them in to us. And so, you know, isolation is a giant thing. Okay. Oh, I think this is video time. So, oh, we're not going to take a break just yet. But so I'm going to play a video for you folks. If anybody has ever heard this call, it's a hard one. It's a very deep call, and I would suggest that, you know, if it gets to be uncomfortable for you folks to hear, I'm sorry. If you feel like you're being triggered by this call in particular because it's extremely heavy, I would suggest that you step away from your computer, take whatever self-care you need in order to take care of yourself. We'll go through this and we'll talk a little bit about it in a little while. So let me see.
13 hours. This will be a 911 call, position CT07.
Standing emergency. What? Standing emergency.
My mommy and Daddy are having a fight.
Is she hitting her?
What? Daddy to the police, Mommy. Stop it! Mommy! Stop it! Don't take the baby! Stop it! You're gonna hurt the baby! Stop it! Could you just send the police, please?
Okay, we're gonna be there. Who's taking your baby?
Stop it! No! Oh! Shut up!
Let me talk to you. Where's your mom?
What?
What's going on?
They're having a fight because this has been going on forever and ever. They always have this because he has a cousin. He's always drinking beer and getting drunk. And Mom.
What's his name? What is his name? Your father's name?
Pierre.
Pierre?
Yeah.
What's his last name?
I don't know, but I think his
Is he
name.
white, black, or Hispanic?
He's black.
He's your father?
He's my stepfather.
Okay, how old is he?
I don't know.
Does he have any weapons?
No. But he's hurting Mom.
How's he hurting her?
He made his mommy.
Okay, don't cry. We're gonna send the police.
Okay.
Okay, now where's your mother at right now?
She's in the room fighting with them.
Does you have a little baby sister?
No, I got baby brother.
Is he trying to take your baby brother?
Baby.
And he's trying to take your baby?
Yeah, because Mama's not drunk. He thinks he's drunk because he can't say nothing because he's drunk. My
Are they in a room fighting? Where are they at now?
They're in the room still.
They're in the bedroom?
Yeah, I don't want him to do nothing strange with the baby because if they drop, he's a newborn baby. He's very delicate.
What do you mean do anything strange? What do you think he's going to do to your baby?
I think he's going to take the baby and do something because he's drunk. He might not see the baby and go off without the baby if he takes it.
How old are you?
I'm 6 and my little sister's 4.
You're 6-year-old? You're 6?
Yeah, and I'm in first grade. My sister's in kindergarten.
Okay, what is your name? What is your name?
Lisa. My sister's name is Drea. Excuse me.
You only... Okay.
Hmm? Okay, could you use the police?
Yeah, they're on the way, but I'm going to keep you on the line until they get there, okay? Is your front door open?
Oh, no.
Can you go and lock it and come back to the phone so the officers can get
Okay.
in?
Just wait, please.
Okay.
He just knocked my sister out.
What sister that he knocked out?
My little sister.
Your
The 4-year-old.
What do you mean he knocked her off?
He pushed her down on the floor. And he cried. I wish he would stop doing this. He did this. Ever since he had him, he had just slapped Mommy.
Which room are they in?
My mom's name is Cindy.
Okay, which room are they in?
They're in, that room.
They're in the back room or the bedroom?
The back. Oh my God!
What's the matter?
Something happened! Just wait for the police! Wait, I want to go see what happened, please!
Okay, the police are on their way, okay? Hello? Lisa?
My stepdaddy's got the baby now!
He has the baby now? Where is he at now?
What?
Lisa, where is he at right now? Is he
He's
still in the house?
in the room who got the baby.
Okay.
And he made some red marks on Mama's, on Mama's neck.
He did what?
He made some red marks on Mama's,
Where did he make the red marks on with their
on
neck?
her neck. On the right side. Very dark. Okay, my mom's going outside. Mama, go! The police are coming.
Is your mother? Hello?
So yeah, I've heard that call many times. I've given it in many presentations and it never ever gets easier to listen to. It never ever gets easier to hear the story behind it. And so we've got, let's take kind of a 10-minute break and we'll come back together. But I encourage you guys during this time, go to the bathroom, do whatever you need, take a walk outside, feel some sunshine, get a drink of water or a snack or whatever you need. And we're gonna come back here in about 10 minutes. So I'll see you guys then. Hey, everybody, welcome back. Hope everybody had a good break. Again, I know I needed that break, so I definitely hope that you folks got yourselves ready to come back from here. And if we could just take like a few seconds to sort of take a humongous deep breath. Yeah, and just to inhale and let all of that video or that part of this session sort of let that go. And so just checking in to see how you folks are doing. And again, we're gonna have some Q&A at the end of this, and I'm gonna give like kind of a good long time. And so we'll talk story after all of this is done. But I'll tell you right now, this is my favorite place in the whole entire world. Those that haven't been to Maui, this is EL Valley. The last time I took this picture was earlier this year, because now they have the park closed because they're doing a whole bunch of stuff. So the park will be closed until next year. So this was taken kind of at the opening stages of opening this park again. But it is my most special place. I grew up in this valley, and so I know it very well. And it's a place that I come to when I want to find solitude, when I need to sort of get grounded again, when I need to get my thoughts together. So I encourage you guys, if you don't have a space like that, find a beautiful space that you can do that at. So let's talk about Lisa's 911 call. So it was quite a heavy call to hear. And, you know, in terms of Lisa, so that call is actually years old. So it's a really old call, and lots of trainers use this call. And it's a good one because it's a good reflection on what abuse does and how even kids respond to abuse, and the kind of things that kids absorb and they learn from being in these abusive situations along with their parents, right? So some of the things, and I always ask, you know, for people, what are those things that really stand out from this call? And, you know, I always get a lot of different answers, but for me, and one of the things that I like to point out is that clearly this was not her first time calling the police. And we'll go through those things as to why and how I know that, right? And how we know that, because you guys heard it too, is that it wasn't Lisa's first time calling the police, because she knew what to say, right? When the dispatcher asked her things like, what's happening? Where are you? She knew exactly how to respond. So it tells me and others that this was not the first time she called. She also knew her name, her age, which is not unusual for children to know, but she knew her siblings' names and ages. Like, she knew to describe, like when the dispatcher asked her if she has a baby sister, she said, no, I have a baby brother. And she knew her stepfather's name, she knew his race, she knew how to describe him, and she knew to give as much information, identifying information, to the dispatcher. And for the most part, when you hear Lisa and her age, she's 6 years old on this call. She knew that she needed to keep somewhat calm, right? Like, so she was listening to the officer, or sorry, to the dispatcher, but she kept asking them, can you please send the police? Can you please send the police? So even though all throughout this chaotic event, right, because it went from different rooms in the house, she knew that, and she was still polite, right? She had a moment where she had like a little burp or hiccup, and she said, excuse me. So she was very polite in how she was speaking, and she was very clear, and it didn't sound like a 6-year-old. I have lots of nieces and nephews, and I have my own kids. And when they were 6, I don't know that they could exactly tell me everything that happened in an incident, right? They wouldn't be able to describe these things to me, let alone in a high crisis situation. Even adults have a hard time processing something or keeping calm during a traumatic event. And so for Lisa, she had been down this road a few different times. And you know, she did her best to get the police there, and they ended up coming. So the result of this phone call, right, was that the police ended up coming to the house, but the mom had sort of denied that some of these things happened. So, you know, exaggerating. But what stands out is that the cops knew, because Lisa told them that she had red marks on her neck, or she said her chin, but really she meant her neck, and that her stepfather had also shoved or pushed aside the little sister and had taken the baby into the room, and he had been drinking. And so the police ended up arresting him. But the mom, Lisa's mom, ended up dropping those charges. So, you know, while this is something that, you know, kids should never experience, what Lisa had did and what she continued to do was to call the police, knowing that hopefully one day it'll trigger some kind of response from our systems. And so her and her siblings ended up going into foster care at some point. Lisa is now, I want to say, probably in her 30s, and she gives these presentations and these talks to officers. She gives it to other law enforcement like sheriffs and court officials. She shares her testimony about her experience being in an abusive situation as a child. So, you know, people hadn't known what happened to this little girl, to Lisa, throughout the years, but she then still got into her own abusive relationships and was heavy into alcohol and drugs. So she too, from her mom's side, watching it, experiencing it as a child, ended up getting into the similar situations. But she had caught the eye of sort of an advocate, and she was seeking help from an advocate, who then in turn realized that this was the same girl, the same woman that I experienced, or that this phone call came from. And so, you know, Lisa now is clean and sober. She's doing well. And again, she shares her testimony throughout the nation about her experiences and how childhood trauma affects you as an adult. And, you know, like I said, I use this call. It's still very hard for me to hear this call. In fact, in preparation for this, I listened to it once or twice, and, you know, still cry, still get teary-eyed. And so if that happens for you, that's okay, you know. But to understand that this is a reality, that this is something that children experience, and we never want our children to experience it. We never want our moms, sisters, aunties, anybody, our grandmothers, to experience this kind of level of trauma. So, yep, children exposed to domestic violence. And I know my counterparts will be sharing more in depth about, you know, what that is. And I'm just here today to just sort of touch upon it. So, you know, for us, we know that children are sponges, right? I had said that about Lisa's phone call. And so whether they're eyewitnesses to what's happened, or if they're in the same house or in the same vicinity, they are still affected by domestic violence, even if it's not directly happening to them. There's even studies, and I didn't put a statistic in here about it, but, and I'm sure my counterparts will introduce this information, but that's, you know, even within the womb, trauma happens, right? And this has been sort of proven throughout the many years, is that yes, even children, unborn children, still experience violence in some way. Just like, you know, unborn children can be can recognize their mom's voice, recognize their father's voice, recognize their siblings' voices before they're even born. Same with the trauma. They'll experience everything that you're experiencing. That's why so much care is taken when women are pregnant and they're, in these situations, because it's very dangerous for them and it's very dangerous for their unborn child. So there's the likelihood that if children are going through these domestic violence situations, that there could be a high incidence of child abuse. So like we were listening in Lisa's call, right? The sister got pushed, the brother was taken, the baby brother was taken, and the mom kept yelling at her to shut up, and do all of these things. So we know that at some point, and if abuse is happening to the mom, that sometimes that will trickle over into the kids, because again, power and control, an abuser is going to use children to maintain power and control over their victim. What also happens sometimes too, which is sad enough, is that the abusers will split the mom from children. So even if they're living in the same house, the mom will be unable to relate emotionally to their child. So then what happens is that you have this child who is completely isolated, and the mom is not giving the level of care that needs to happen with their child. And so, we see a lot of children that just get passed from family to family because the parent is and she's such in an abusive state that, that happens, the disconnect happens. We see it lots with little children, we see it lots throughout the whole gambit, and it's really sad to see, and we're trying to help bridge that sort of gap and help that heal. When women come to shelter, a lot of times they don't know their children, and they're not familiar with what their children need or what they want, because they don't have that level of parenting connection with their child. And so again, there's programs out there that help to repair that, but it takes a lot of time. It takes a lot of trust on both sides. And the impact of that child abuse may not be immediately noticed. So for a lot of kids, especially when they're little, they'll start to behave differently. They'll act out, right? They'll become aggressive, or they'll become really reclusive. So in school, a lot of teachers will notice, especially if they've been coming to school consistently. And again, some kids don't end up going to school because their parent is disconnected from them. So you can see how having abuse in a household really, really stresses, really traumatizes everyone in the house. It's not just the two parties that are involved. If you have children, they're all victims of domestic violence. So too, what we want to eliminate is that potential for future victims or abusers. So, we know that boys can be quite aggressive, and so when they're in these states of trauma and they're experiencing domestic violence, there's a tendency that, either girl or boy, that they'll be victims or abusers. There's a high likelihood. I will share that, we've had children in shelter, and we've seen kids beat up other kids, and they're little. They're like 5, 4, and they'll pick on other kids that are in the shelter, or they'll harm other kids. I've had a 6-year-old who pulled a knife on another child that was a little older because they were upset, because they were angry. And these are things that they've seen. So again, that domestic violence is a learned behavior. And so kids are learning it. They're sponges. They're going to accept whatever information is given to them as truth. And so they'll put that energy towards showing other individuals how what they're experiencing. So for children, it's a little easier to help them, I would say, versus adults, because as adults, we're kind of stuck in our own ways, and it's harder for us to relearn something sometimes. But children are good, and they're very resilient at being able make that shift over to healthy relationships, to having positive self-images, to experience loving relationships, right? With family members or with their parents again, or with their mom again, or with their dad again. So, for us, we try to work really hard with the kids, and kids all together, they're so sweet, and we see it a lot. I love working with the kids because they are so honest. They're so transparent. They will tell you exactly what they're experiencing, even if they have no idea of what that means. They'll share lots of information. And so for me, I love working with the kids, and I got kids of my own, so it's they have my heart for sure. But what we want to prevent for sure is the potential for those future victims or those future abusers. And the behaviors that they're going to exhibit is that, again, that aggressiveness. They'll be passive or withdrawn. So they'll either go from one end, being very aggressive, to the other end of being very passive, constant crying. You'll see lots of just weeping and crying. I see plenty of the kids that come through, they have a hard time processing emotions. And so either they act out in violence, or they act out by being very withdrawn. Sometimes kids can be extremely manipulative as well. And for us as adults, we recognize it right away, but the kids, they will do and say what they need to just to survive. And that makes a lot of sense, right? We do the same thing. They'll become rebellious, they'll act out. And particularly the toddlers who don't have quite the range of vocabulary that the older kids do, they'll definitely act out. They'll have lots of health problems. So, we've seen anything from like stomach issues, anxiety, depression. They'll have lots of learning disabilities because they have experienced, and so they don't have that cognitive function yet, because they've been such in this abusive high adrenaline state for a long time. And if you've ever been in that flight or fight mode, it can be very taxing on your body. It can break down organs. It can do all of these things. So what we want to do is remove the stress from that child's life. And they'll have lots of psychological issues most of the time. But again, kids are super resilient, and they tend to bounce back a little bit better than adults do. Doesn't mean that those things will never affect their lives ever again, but they tend to come back from that state and relearn some of the things that they saw happening in their lives, that they'll relearn these positive behaviors versus the negative behaviors. The trick is, though, that you need to get them in time, because we want to work with them when they're still little. And we give a lot of talks to schools, especially middle schools and elementary schools, about healthy relationships. And that still kind of blows my mind, because we're having these long conversations about having a healthy dating relationship and also having a healthy family relationship. And to think that middle schoolers are dating and doing all of these things, if we wait till high school, that is way too late, because they've probably already been and experienced some kind of dating relationship. And we hope to help more kids understand what a healthy relationship looks like and how to ask for help. Many of the kids that go through abusive relationships end up suffering from some form of PTSD. And again, my counterparts will have much more information on this, and they'll give you everything you folks need. I just wanted to sort of touch upon it just a bit. And so when we're talking about teen dating violence, we're also talking about the similar things that happen in an adult relationship. So there's an 84% chance of psychological dating abuse that happens when when they're in this relationship. For many of the kids, this is their first relationship ever. And so, I remember what it was like to go through my first relationship, and I was just, all in. And if you've had a positive experience of seeing what a healthy relationship looks like, it can be a positive experience, right, for you. But if you've only seen domestic violence happening in your household, if you've only had those feelings of being unworthy, if you've only had a negative self-talk, self-image, and you've only been experiencing that, there's a likelihood that your dating relationship is going to be equally as abusive. And so, many of the teens that were polled in this were saying that 84% of them had psychological dating abuse. And I have written lots of restraining orders for teens or for parents on behalf of their teen who has gotten into a relationship in high school, and it has become extremely abusive. 52% of them experience physical dating violence. So again, we'll see the teens coming in, they'll have bruises, they'll have black eyes, they'll have gone to the hospital for broken anything. So the parents are very concerned. Lots of them experience sex for the first time in these relationships. And, in fact, 33% of them were sexually coerced. So, teens are experiencing many of the things that adults are, but at a different level, because now they're still formative, right? They're still forming these thoughts and ideas about who they are. But that gets interrupted when they're in these violent relationships. And at least half of them experience reporting dating violence and rape, also have attempted suicide. So, it's really scary for our youth, and it's hard for youth already, for teens to talk to adults. But we need to be aware of what's happening in their lives. And if you have teens, hopefully you've had some healthy relationship talks with them. And it really pays. It really pays to have those conversations. I know it was tough to have those conversations with my kids, but I wanted them to know, like, I'd rather have an uncomfortable situation, an uncomfortable conversation, rather than have them go through a situation that they weren't aware of or not prepared for. And so along with teens, we're going to talk a little bit about those underserved populations. So remember how I was saying, when we're describing victims, we usually use the pronoun her, and when we're describing abusers, we're using the pronoun him. It applies to also elderly and disabled abuse. For those, a lot of the times their abusers are either their caregivers, which could be a family member, or it could be a relationship that they've been in, right? So we see a lot of the older generation coming through and filing restraining orders against their grandkids, against their kids, against their partners even. And, for the partners, they could be have been married for 40 plus years, and then they're tired. They're so tired of being in these relationships. And for that population, for the elderly population, it becomes a little harder because none of them really want to come in here. This is the last place that they want to be, and they didn't think that it would happen to them in their age and at their time. For many of them, they have sometimes dementia, they have other underlying issues that make it difficult for them to process what is happening, right? So when especially with the grandchildren and the kids themselves that are abusive to their elderly parents or grandparents, it's hard, and we try to take tender care and work with them through a process, especially if what they're doing is doing a restraining order, because we want to be sure that they're comfortable enough and they understand exactly what is happening. I mean, we do that with all of our victims, but especially with this population, we try and take longer care, because this is sort of new for them. They don't know. It never happened in their in their lifetime, their moms or their grandmothers never had to go and do this because, like a lot of cultures, we're used to keeping it within our own circle, within our own bubble, right? Whatever happens in our family stays in our family. That still somewhat holds true today, especially in this population and in a lot of cultures. And so they're less likely to report if their abuser is their only means of care, or if that abuser has power of attorney over all their finances and things of such. Also, we work and we see a lot of undocumented community that come through. And a lot of what I hear first is that, oh, I don't want to come forward because I don't want to be deported. And so that sort of magnifies everything else, because what they're concentrated on is not being deported. Even though they have every right to be in this country, they are documented, or they're undocumented, but they don't know what their rights are. And so they still have rights in this country, and we have an immigrant services advocate that will work with them and help them get and obtain their status. And we just partner with that whole system to be able to make that happen. And a lot of times what they're not describing to you first, or what their need is, what they're saying their need is for documentation, because they want to take care of that first so that they don't get deported for whatever reason. A lot of times there will be language barriers as well, right? We don't speak every language that's out there. And so for us, you know, we do have language access lines and all of those things. And it just makes it, again, like a little bit more challenging. We have to take a little bit more time, but it's definitely worth it to take the extra time, because you want to make sure that they get the level of care that they need, and that the level of care that is right for them. We also like to sort of explain what their rights are. And, you know, for us, we don't claim to have all the knowledge of rights, but we do have people that know it really well. And we partner with a lot of legal aid foundation and all of them that do have these right information for them. So we help them navigate that system as much as possible. Now, the LGBTQ plus community also, and right in our building, we have right downstairs is the Maui AIDS Foundation. And so, you know, I'm grateful that they offer their level of knowledge to us. And, you know, there's been a lot of talk over the years that this population in particular doesn't seek services because they don't feel welcome into a facility, right? Like I said, you know, everything is very like cisgender. So it's a lot of he, she. And so for us to make that switch into welcoming everybody, because we want everyone to come and seek their service. If you are experiencing this, we want to be the ones to help you, especially in a small county like ours, where there's lots of services, but you know, there's very limited services as far as helping survivors of DV. And so want to be able to welcome everyone. So even doing little things like, you know, it's Pride Month, and we'll be there. We'll be at those tables. We'll be giving out information. We're going to partner with Maui AIDS Foundation. They have an office space in our HANA office that they're utilizing to do testing. And so with the testing, right, where we had discussed it, I said, we want you guys to occupy this space. We want you guys to do testing here, so that even if their partner says, oh yeah, okay, we should go get tested, they can go get tested. But in the same breath, right, they can, if they say that they're experiencing domestic violence, they were right, like in that same house, in that same cottage. So we can help them immediately. And that could be their way of getting help that they would have not otherwise have gotten access to. And so being able to offer these avenues of people to come through and get services has been really, really something that's been, I know, on our agency's heart, is making sure that everybody knows that it is equal services. So come and seek us. We have had lots of transgender women come through. The trans community is so is hard to reach, I will say. And this is coming from our advocates downstairs. And, you know, we've been trying to figure out like, how do we reach them more? Like, because they can be very aggressive with one another. It's a very destructive, sometimes relationship that they're in. And for majority of them, and this is talking to one of their main advocates downstairs, is the consensus is, and she's a trans woman as well, is saying that, you know, when a trans woman will believe that she needs to be abused to be in a healthy relationship, which sounds like totally backwards. And she understands, right? Like she was telling me that it can be very aggressive and very violent, but this is the way they feel like they can be loved. And so that was kind of an eye-opener for me, is to see like, okay, well, what else can we do? Like, I don't want to force this down anybody's throat, right? I want to make sure that they are coming to us because they truly want to learn and want to experience what a healthy relationship is. So yeah, that's kind of that's one of the goals that I have for the next, you know, few months, few years, whatever. And also, let's not forget that the military and law enforcement are also groups that are hard to reach. And the rural populations, right? So like we have an office in Hana, that's highly rural. It takes, you know, 2.5 hours, depending on who's driving, to get to that community. And so even those populations on Molokai, right? Like I'm a Maui girl, born and raised Maui, but for me to go in there and give services to the island of Molokai would be really challenging for me because I'm technically an outsider. I'm not from that population, right? I didn't grow up there. I don't know people there. And so, you know, they would see me as somebody that is not worth talking to. They wouldn't trust me right away. So, you know, the advocates that do live there that work for the other program, they have better access and more availability of themselves to the survivors that are there. For us in Hana, like again, I'm technically an outsider. I'm a townie because I live on this side of the island, but we do have an advocate who is from Hana. She lives in Hana. That's where her family's raised. And so the community trusts her. So they come to her with all their issues that they have. She does get bombarded, but you know, that's being bombarded versus not hearing anything at all from the community, to me, is a better sign, right? So for us getting to that populations, those outside populations, you need to have somebody who's already from there, who's already in it, because they will know who's who, right? And they'll know how to approach. Like, yeah, Hana people are great. I love them. They're like my heart. I love being out there. But I would be the last person that they would say something to because I'm from the other side of the island. Law enforcement and military, of course, you know, they have their own ranks, they have their own system. So those are one of the things to consider as well. And many of them, and we've filed, and I've done restraining orders for military personnel against other military personnel. So that system becomes tricky as well. So it's good to know who your resources are within those communities, right? You need some allies in those communities. For us, in our police department, we have our DV unit, which does a great job. There's only 2 officers that occupy that DV unit, but they do a fabulous job of making sure that, you know, their officers know how to treat survivors. They know how to ask the right questions, how to have those conversations that might be tough, or how to observe, right, body language and all those things. They're already taught those things, but this is different. You're gonna notice more things. And we do what's called like mock scenarios. So we do mock training with the officers, and we give them a really realistic view of what it's like to walk into a domestic violence household situation, right? A response. And we will do the full gamut. We put makeup on, we change our behavior. We'll, you know, do things like be part of, have an LGBTQ a relationship and show those things. So, you know, we live in Hawaii. We have lots of tiras out there, and they're not all gonna look like the traditional survivor, right? They're not gonna look like the victims who are like demure, they're very withdrawn. Yes, there are lots of those victims, but what you're gonna see sometimes is officers responding because a female hit a male. And you gotta ask the question, and you have to look at the whole picture, because maybe it was at that point where she was completely fed up. She had had enough, and so she retaliated against her abuser. And so now the abuser, perhaps knowing the system really well, calls the police and says, oh, I got, you know, a little scratch, or she hurt me. And so who gets arrested and who gets removed? Oftentimes it's the person who doesn't have the injury, right? So that's what we're working with the police department and trying to educate them more on what those situations may look like. In fact, we do a conference every year here on Maui that is called Their Voice. So you'll get survivors that come in and they're part of this panel. And so they'll share their experiences and they'll share what would be helpful for an officer to know and do before they come in to a household, to a situation, right? So we've been working really hard and we try our best to do what we can do. But yeah, these communities, there's many more out there, but these are the ones that we see the majority of the time that I think that need the most care. They need the most serving at this point. And so, like I said, you know, we have lots of victims that are out there. We know the underserved populations. And so for me, these three ladies, especially over the last year, right, 2 years, have stood out for us, for our agency in particular. Kehao, if you guys were not aware, she, you know, her incident, she was killed in the middle of Foodland on Maui on a very busy time of the day. It was like right after work. So it was like 4:30, 5 o'clock. And her estranged husband murdered her right there in the store, right in front of everyone to see. And so, you know, what happened recently, speaking about the military, right? This victim, Dana, she had that YouTube channel, right? And so she was sharing her experiences, but nobody thought to reach out in some way. And, you know, me, I'm not so much a social media type of person. So, you know, for knowing this after the fact was kind of concerning because, you know, she had shared her experiences. She had shared what she was going through. And I wonder if there was anyone who had reached out and talked to her and helped her in some way or tried, right? Like we can't force anybody to do something they don't want to do. But if they're making a public statement for everyone to see, there's things going on. And so that could indicate that she might be ready to hear or to receive some type of help. It was very tragic the way things happened for her, you know, and being murdered by her military husband, who then tried to kill himself or make it seem as if he was also attacked. You know, it's really concerning, and my heart goes out to her family and, you know, her husband's family as well. And, you know, having talked to lots of military personnel, there's a lot that they're trying to do in terms of dealing with PTSD that comes from being abroad and having to go into the service and experiencing things that have happened in their lives or in duty, on active duty, right? So the military is trying to work really hard to prevent things like this from happening or to offer the help and the support. For me, I have a firefighter brother-in-law, and he has shared some very horrific stories of things that he's seen. And so one of my first questions is, so how does the company take care of you? What kind of care do you get from, you know, from the state, from the federal government? What kind of care do you receive? Like how do you guys get to process? How do you get to debrief something like that? So I think those are the questions that, you know, we need to be asking of the military. We need to be asking of police department, right? I think the police department is making steps in the right direction. But for the military, it's a little harder to sort of change the system or to infiltrate the system to some extent. But we are always available as advocates, like we're always available. So, and then of course, Isabella Kalua, who was killed by her adoptive parents, she wasn't in a intimate partner relationship, but definitely it constitutes domestic violence for sure. So it wasn't just her, it was her sibling as well that experienced severe abuse. And so, you know, whenever there's a child that is murdered, it always hits very close to home for a lot of us. And so, you know, we want to make sure that the community knows that people can see things, they see things. So even when you think somebody doesn't see something, they've already seen it. And so you have to be really aware of what's going on. And I think that comes with, again, that the gift of suspicion. But even in looking at dating relationships, right? Like for me, I'm always looking at all right, is this, for some reason, because we've been talking a lot about sex trafficking in other portions of our work, is like I'm looking at these huge age dynamic relationships. Like, you know, you have very young female with a very much older gentleman, and you're like, all right, so what's happening here? So you really gotta, like, for me, it's a lot of like trying to figure things out. For the community, you know, it's great that we give people space, but in the same turn, we cannot be complacent when it comes to showing care for family, friends, and others. Like, we want to be sure that we check in on people. And even then, you know, it's not up to us what happens. It's truly the abuser that makes things happen most times, right? And it's up to the victim too to step away from that relationship, to take that bold step away from the relationship and say truly that they want to make a change and they want to learn something different and they want to do something better to better themselves. So there's a lot of factors that go into it. And you have to decide to step off that crazy wheel of power and control. So we're gonna watch a short video and I was talking about, you know, Kehal's situation, but I'll show you the news clip that came from that and we'll talk a little bit more.
Person dead and others injured. The suspect is 45-year-old Stephen Schmidt. He's charged with murder and attempted murder. The stabbings happened inside the Foodland Kehalani in Wailuku. We learned the victim was his estranged wife, and she notified authorities just last month of potential danger. Bridget Namada dug deeper. Bridget?
Joe, we did some digging and learned that not only has Stephen Schmidt had several run-ins with the law, but the victim, his wife, was granted a restraining order against him just days before the deadly incident took place. This Foodland in Wailuku, the scene of a deadly crime between husband, wife, and those who tried to intervene. It happened around 6 on Tuesday night. Police tell us 45-year-old Stephen Schmidt started an argument with a man his estranged wife was with inside the store. 24-year-old Kehal Farias Schmidt was stabbed to death. 2 males, a 53-year-old Wailuku resident and a 34-year-old Haiku resident, tried to intervene. Both were stabbed but are in stable condition. We looked into Stephen Schmidt's criminal history and found he's been convicted of 6 crimes in the past, including assault, terroristic threatening, and burglary. We dug deeper and found out his estranged wife was granted a temporary restraining order against Schmidt on April 13, a week before the deadly crime. Schmidt was ordered to stay away for 1 year. Nancy Creedman with the Domestic Violence Center says,
1 week. suggests to me that her communication, her message to him that she was leaving is a very strong message, and oftentimes makes perpetrators escalate their violence.
But Creedman says it's very important for those in abusive relationships to seek help.
Remind them that if they are making plans to leave, or they do leave, that a safety plan could be the difference between life and death.
Creedman says domestic violence programs can help a person safely leave their partner.
Because when you are faced with the assault, it's much harder to think. So if you have a plan in place, you're a little bit better able to think.
In a statement, Foodland said they were shocked and saddened by the incident and are cooperating with investigators. The store was closed today and will reopen tomorrow. Bridget Namata, KHON2 News.
Yeah, so for us, we were the ones that did that restraining order. So we had to do a lot of processing with our advocates, and one of our advocates sat with her in court and said that they had looked over at Stephen a few times and didn't notice anything out of the ordinary. So with his behavior, he didn't indicate that anything was going to happen. But in later talkings and research, you know, there's a lot of things that led up, and what a lot of people didn't know his history. And so, you know, if a abuser is intent on causing harm to their victim, they will do it regardless of if there's a TRO in place or anything like and I sometimes tell this to victims just to give them an idea on what that is. It's like, you know, it is a sheet of paper. It's a piece of paper. And so if someone wants to violate that, they will. And that piece of paper is not necessarily going to stop them. However, that piece of paper does work, and it does hold weight in all 50 states. And so, you know, to have them get that protection gives them perhaps the tool, the mechanism to make that move. But that time from when she decides to leave the relationship is the most dangerous time. So when we talk about safety planning, when we talk about risk assessments, right, we're talking about what's the danger that is there, and how high are they on a scale that there's going to be murder, homicide, that is the result, right? What's the likelihood of that? And that's where these risk assessments come in. And so the one that we're more familiar with, is particularly in our agency that we use for a lot of our court paperwork, is the danger assessment tool that was created by Jacqueline Campbell in 1985, and it has since been revised in 2014. So what it is just 15 questions that are asked of a survivor, of a woman, to determine the likelihood of homicide. So in those 15 questions, and I'll put a link to the assessment at the end of this, but it's questions like, does he have a weapon? Has he ever threatened to use a weapon against you? So a lot of the questions are geared towards if the individual has access to weapons, right? Or if you have kids that are not his. That's one of the questions. So Jacqueline Campbell she was a nurse in one of the bigger hospitals here in our nation. But she was noticing, like, these are the questions that really trigger a response to how likely it is for there to be a homicide. And what we do from there, so when we ask these 15 questions and we see kind of where they fall on this scale, we as advocates are going to try and develop a very specific plan for the individual. So again, you know, in that news article where Nancy Creedman shared that, you know, safety planning would have been better, helpful. And yes, I agree, safety planning, and it's probably, and I know that we did do this, we did safety plan with her. However, again, we cannot control the behavior of people. So even if someone scores really low on this danger assessment tool, it doesn't mean that they cannot or will not commit some kind of attack or homicide, right? This just tells us that because all of these factors have been met, there is a likelihood that there's going to be a massive event that happens and possibly leading up to homicide, right? So as advocates, we want to be as flexible as possible with these safety plans. We want to give them as much say, because again, we don't live their life. We don't know what their experiences are. We don't know what the triggers are for their abuser. And even if the situation sounds like somebody else's, it is not the same. So we must treat every victim like a brand new victim, because they are, because their story is not our story, and their story is not someone else's story. So just because someone left their relationship who was in a similar situation and they're fine, it does not mean that this survivor's experience is going to be the same, right? Their outcome is not going to be the same. And we need to keep that in mind. And so we want the survivor to tell us what they need to be safe. We want to know what that looks like. And so there's something else that people use as well, which is a DV screening instrument. And I'm not sure if that is heavily used here in Hawaii, but I do know, just speaking with other agencies, on the mainland and such, that this is something that the courts use prior to a court, to a court hearing, and it's for the probation records. It's a really short tool. It's kind of like the danger assessment tool. And it's, of course, used to determine the level of risk for reoffense. So, while it holds quite a bit of weight, especially with judges and things like that, I think this is more of something that they use in order to help sort of make the accurate decisions that they need to make, or the good decisions that they need to make in order to help even abusers, right? Because we don't just want to help victims. The ultimate goal is for us to help the abusers as well. Like, we want them to get treatment. We want them to get the right amount of help as well. And if they're reoffending, we want them to stay in jail. We want them to, actually, we want that justice to happen, right? Everybody wants justice. And so, we want to also treat that side as well. While our agency doesn't do it, there's other agencies that do help the offenders in some way. And again, this is used for pretrial evaluations and things like that. If any of you folks have been to any kind of court hearings for criminal cases, this is just part of the process, and they have to do the pretrial evaluations. So this is a good question, right? I've been kind of leading up to this. It's like, how do we respond? How do we respond to survivors, right? You guys are hopefully working with survivors or doing work sort of on the cusp of that, right? So for me, a lot of times when I'm working with new advocates, I'm always telling them that, our approach should be that of empathy, right? We don't want to be sympathetic so much as we want to be empathetic, and there's a big difference. And if you are a fan of Brene Brown, she has a really great video on this. And, we're going to ask questions, and we're going to ask the other party if they are safe or need someone to talk to. And we just gave sort of a short presentation to the University of Hawaii, the Maui campus here, of their faculty and staff. And so, our thing was like, okay, you want to ask questions, but you need to be also prepared for what you're going to say. Because if you hear something that you're not prepared to hear, it's going to be kind of a letdown for both sides, right? And we also want to be sure that we're listening to what they're saying or what's not being said. So I can tell you that body language speaks so much louder than words will most times, right? And, you know, that comes with like, hey, how are you doing? And they're clearly slumped over, not having a good day, but they go, good. Like, obviously, you know, something's wrong, right? It doesn't, the body language does not match the words. So for me, I always look at body language. It's always a big thing. And then when somebody tells you a disclosure that they're in an abusive relationship, please believe what they're telling you, because there's nothing worse than somebody disclosing something and you might be the first person that they talk to about this. You might be the first person who has ever heard what they've said, and they have this confidence in you, right? They trust you. And then when you tell them, or when they tell you and then you don't believe it, it just kind of makes them feel like, well, I'll never share this information with anybody again. I will never share it with anyone again. And so along with being very empathetic, asking the right questions, listening to what they're saying and believing what they're saying, you know, you're going to offer, and you don't have to have all the answers, right? You can say things like, wow, I'm so sorry that this is happening to you. I'm not sure how to respond. However, like, you know, and then you can refer them to these national hotlines, to our DV hotline, to Oahu's DV hotline. You can give them all the resources and just say, if you need to talk more, I'm open to hearing, you know? So you want to keep those doors open, but you also need to create a little bit of boundary, because their trauma shouldn't be your trauma as well, right? So it's kind of dancing that little bit of a fine line. And also the biggest thing that I hear from people that call and ask, well, how do I help somebody? It's my sister who's experiencing that, and I just want her to get help. Like, I need her to do this, this, and this. And you're like, okay, great. But is that what she wants to do? Is that her choice to do it? Right? So if we think about power and control, that power and control has been ripped away from victims. And so we want to empower them to make decisions, or to give them options, right? Give them options to make a decision. Tell them, explain to them this decision and this decision, and then let them make it. It's a harder way to work. It's a frustrating way to work. Not everybody likes it. It's very black and white. As I tell everybody, we operate right in the gray area. So if you're not prepared to let someone make that decision, you know, find somebody who can listen and be non-judgmental, who can offer just the support, right? We are also not going to pressure them to leave, because it could not be safe. It might not be safe for them to do so, and they're not ready to. Because for some of the victims, they still want that relationship back. They miss the person that they fell in love with. And so, you know, they're hopeful that they'll get this relationship back. We want to do everything on their time frame. We also want them to encourage them to call domestic violence programs, because they can remain anonymous with us, and we don't know their situation. We don't know them personally most times, right? But Hawaii zoning is so big. So sometimes you run into people that you know, but at least working with somebody in a DV agency will help them create more anonymity and give them the space to share more. And also, like everybody else, I'm kind of a fix-it person. And I feel like I sometimes want to rescue people, but I resist the urge as much as possible to try and rescue people, because it puts yourself in a very difficult situation, as well as for them. Because if they choose to stay in this relationship, or they choose to go back, they may not ever reach out to you ever again, because they think they've disappointed you somehow, because you tried to rescue them, you tried to fix it, right? So again, we want to give as much power and freedom back to the victims. Oh, and I have a short video for you folks. Sorry, one more video, I promise, and that's it. And this is kind of a good video about being empathetic and having good listening ears.
it's just, there's all this pressure, you know? And sometimes it feels like it's right up on me and I can just feel it, like literally feel it in my head, and it's relentless. And I don't know if it's gonna stop. I mean, that's the thing that scares me the most, is that I don't know if it's ever gonna stop.
Yeah. Well, you do have a nail in your head.
It is not about the nail.
Are you sure? Because, I mean, I'll bet if we got that out of there...
Stop trying to fix it.
No, I'm not trying to fix it. I'm just pointing out that maybe the nail is causing...
You always do this. You always try to fix things when what I really need is for you to just listen.
Yeah, see, I don't think that is what you need. I think what you need is to get the nail
See, you're
out.
not even listening now.
Okay, fine. I will listen. Fine.
It's just, sometimes it's like, there's this achy, I don't know what it is. And I'm not sleeping very well at all. And all my sweaters are snagged. I mean, all of them.
Yeah, that sounds really hard.
It is. Thank you. Ow!
Oh, come on. If you would just...
Don't.
I don't know why that video always gets me. It's such a... Oop, let me get out of that. But yeah, it's a good message for those that need to listen. Like, I'm very one of those people that goes from A to B really quick. And so sometimes it's a message for me. I need to listen more. So yeah, just a funny video. It's a short one. I encourage my staff to watch it often because they're similar to me. We can't fix everything, and people are not always asking us to fix it. So good to listen. Keep your listening ears on. But for those that don't know, of course, it's October, and of course, it's Domestic Violence Awareness Month. So I encourage you guys to get involved with any organizations. These are just some of the things that we do. Those that aren't familiar, we do the Walk a Mile in Her Shoes. And these are just some of the guys from this year's event that we had. They walked a full mile in heels. Many of them came up to me afterwards and were just like, I didn't know that that's how it feels, that that's how much it hurts to walk in these shoes, but thank you for letting me be part of it. They're very brave souls to attack that. We do a lot of other events. Last year we did a Holo Holo Halloween at our mall. Yeah, lots of kids came up and were trying to pop all my balloons, but we had a good time. Lots of people turned out. We do lots of sign waving and all of these things, and we gather together as groups. But I encourage you folks during this time, during the entire year, not just October, is to get involved, connect with your local nonprofits, and just offer support. Like, you have gifts and talents that maybe others don't have, and we as advocates don't have. And so offering those things, if you think there's something that survivors need, please definitely offer, because we're always looking for volunteers. We're always looking for helping hands, especially during these big events, these awareness events. And so we're going to do a little bit of Q&A, and I'll defer to my my counterparts here. And I'll leave this screen up if you don't mind, unless we're going to do another gallery mode. But yeah, please put your questions in there.
Mhm. Thank you so much, Sanoe. That was a great presentation, followed by some really great clips. I know that the Lisa 911 call was really hard, but I just appreciated taking the time to really hear what it feels like to, on the Keki's end. And have you ever heard in your work, like, whatever happened to Lisa after all these years? Anything about any news on the kid, or the sister or the mother? If you've ever, I always wonder. And so if you know of any follow-up, whatever happened to Lisa, and would share maybe any resources, would love to share that with the group. I think it's so important.
So in terms of Lisa goes, she ended up being in her own abusive relationships, and then was able to share her story, but only after she had already been out of her abusive relationship, the last one she was in. And so she's doing well. She shares her story throughout the nation, and mostly for law enforcement. As far as her siblings go, we don't know what happened to them. We don't know. I think shortly after that, her mom did still stay in this relationship, in the abusive relationship, but we don't know what happened to her siblings or to her mother, which is really tragic, you know. And I'm sure there's more to that, and I would love to, you know, get in front of her and speak and listen to what she had, what her experiences were with that. And she has a firsthand knowledge, unfortunately, right?
Yeah.
But yeah.
All right, so just some couple questions that we've been getting in throughout the webinar. I would love to hear your response to. If a couple are both abusive with each other over and over in their relationship, is that considered domestic violence situation or neither? So say the man, like example is the man is emotionally and physically abusive and the woman is verbally abusive.
Yeah, so it's I would constitute that as intimate partner violence. You know, it's kind of borderline domestic violence or situational violence. So, you know, oftentimes when the relationship is getting ready to end, or one or both parties doesn't want to end the relationship, they'll still be you know, they'll still have these bouts of physical violence, or emotional violence or psychological violence. And I think, you know, it's, while there is the power and control dynamic, and sounds like those examples are more geared toward, I would lean that more towards domestic violence. If either party had called, I would consider that, because it's a pattern, right? Like it's an over long period of time. It's not just something that happens once or twice or something. This would be an extreme, like a pattern of abuse. And for a lot of them, you know, they don't want to end the relationship. But you know, it might be a sign that that relationship is ending in some form. And so they probably need to work through that with counseling and all of that things. I don't necessarily encourage couples counseling, especially when you're in domestic violence. I think it's tough to go through couples counseling because you don't want your abuser to hear the things that you've been experiencing and use that against you after that session is done. So individual counseling for sure. And then if it makes sense and it's right to come together as a couple after a period of time, then, you know, couples counseling can be great.
Great, thank you for that. How do you recommend approaching a client who acknowledges that they are indeed in a domestic violence situation, but they still love their abuser and are financially reliant on the abuser for them and their children as well?
Yeah, that's a hard one, but yeah, one that we see pretty much on a daily basis. You know, my suggestion would be to make sure that you have an open door with them. Like, you want to keep that door open with them. You know, offer them tools and let them know that it's okay to still love your abuser. Like, as backwards as that might sound, it's okay to still love your abuser. Because again, what she misses is that person from the beginning, that person that she fell in love with, that person that was charming and, you know, did maybe love them in the beginning, and then things happen, and situations happen. But if, you know, I would ask her if it's safe for her to work, if she would like to work, if what does it look like for her to be in a safe environment, and go from that description, because that helps at least give you a direction on what she's looking towards. And in terms of her still loving her abuser or still wanting to be in that relationship, I mean, you know, you don't have to be okay with it, but at least let her know that these things are her decisions, and you can perhaps suggest, like, you know, show her a little bit of the pros and cons, right? Like, you want to give her, this is the information that you've given me, these are the things that have happened, and this is what I want to show you what a healthy relationship looks like, the equality will, or what a power and control relationship looks like. and I want to show her those two things. And a lot of times that will sort of trigger them to say like, yeah, I don't, or ask her what's hard about leaving this relationship. What is the most difficult? Is it the emotional part? For this woman, sounds like, you know, financial and kids, and helping her to make a plan for that would be helpful as well. Again, we want to make sure that they move at their speed. And it can be extremely frustrating. Like I said, I'm a fast moving person when it comes to making decisions. And so, you know, it's hard to work that way. Hopefully that answers the question. I said a lot of words, so.
I think there was something in there. I think that a lot of folks could take away from. So appreciate you answering that question. But another question kind of pop up. Can behavior change from soft spoken to bubbly in order to cover up being abused? Are you?
Absolutely, yes, for sure.
Mhm.
So yeah, it doesn't mean that always, you know, the bubbly person is gonna switch and become, you know, very reclusive. It goes the other way as well. So you got people that are completely introverted that behave in such a way as to kind of give the impression that they are okay, that everything is all right. And you're like, you're not really like that. Like, what's different? What's changed? They've gotten into any new relationship. Might be some questions to ask, or even in meeting their partner sometimes. And I've seen this like blasted all over TikTok and whatnot, but people will like they'll get into a group and they'll meet somebody new, they'll meet a new partner of their friends, and you know, everybody will be like, I really like this person. And then, you know, then from the outside you're like, oh, there's something off, like there's something that is not quite right. So trusting your intuition is big. But yes, that person can go from being extremely introverted to then pretending like they're the most extroverted person in the world to cover that up.
Thank you. Yeah, that's signs. We should always keep assessing our relationships and the people that we're in, right? To always keep up to date with behavior changes and patterns, and just keeping an eye out. Thank you for that. We had a couple questions about police. What do you do if the abuser is a police officer? Have you ever had that, in the past, your experience? Could you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so we've had many occasions where the abuser is the police officer. In that instance, it kind of depends on what is safe in the moment. So if the victim is looking to seek safe shelter, then we may understand that this island might not be the safest place for them, right? Because if the police will respond to some incident, she may not get any, depending on the officer, right? She may not get helped as readily as, say, if she were on a different island. So if we're looking for safety and support, we got to really look at the entire picture. So if it's not safe for her to be there, if there's been extreme threats, especially, you know, officers, they can carry weapons, and, you know, they, if there's a TRO in place, the weapons will be removed from the officer. And we've had that happen plenty of times. And, you know, for us, there's big safety issues. There's been a lot of officers that we've had to sort of retrain and relearn how to work with the survivors. Like, we even get officers that sometimes respond negatively to survivors, but then we also have those officers that are like extremely for survivors. And so they don't tolerate things that happen within their department, within, you know, their ranks, right? They are working towards getting their officers to be better. And this is happening with our DV unit. They're shifting that mindset. But yes, when we have victims that their partners are law enforcement, it gets a little bit trickier. Especially when we've been told by them that the police will respond, but because he's buddy with such and such and all the officers love him, that they won't give her the seriousness that it needs. So when we step in as advocates, when you step in as an advocate or a healthcare provider, you really need to contact the right individual. So having those connections within the police department helps a lot, especially if they're an ally of survivors. You want those connections. So forming those really great connections will help quite a bit. But the court system does its best to make sure that these officers are also held accountable for things that happen.
I just kind of want to piggyback because we had somebody in the, throughout the presentation drop a comment on an experience that a friend of theirs had a partner who was in the police, law enforcement officer. They moved away. But they're still to this day wondering if they're following them and they could chase them. Would you, for somebody in that situation or anyone in that situation, would you recommend a TRO so that way it puts that officer on something on file, like how they could have the connections, but what if they don't, right? What can we do as advocates to support them in the way that could lead to those connection building?
Yeah, so the tricky thing with restraining orders is that it gives an indication, especially if the victim has already fled and they're hiding for their safety, right? It's going to disclose where they are. So if they don't want to be disclosed, if their location doesn't, if you don't want them to know where you're at, it may not be safe to do a restraining order. That may not be the action that they need to take. If you're far enough away, most times, that distance gives at least some time frame, right? Because anywhere in Hawaii, you have to fly somewhere. So it's not going to be an instantaneous, like I can't drive across the border or any of those things to a connecting state. I actually physically have to get onto a plane to go somewhere else. TROs, they work really well, and they transfer to every state and every territory within the United States. It's just as if it's up to the survivor if they want to disclose where they're at. They can file it from any state that they're at. The court is a little bit more, I don't want to say fussy, but they're a little bit more, they follow, of course, the letter of the law. And so that has to, if there was recent acts of abuse, that's the key thing. So if there hasn't been anything recent, and I'm talking like within the last month or so, the court is less likely to issue a temporary restraining order. So, that has to come into play as well. If they've not had any contact with their abuser for a period of time, perhaps they might feel a little bit safer, especially if they're away from the state.
Awesome, thank you. We had somebody actually bring up this question during your how do we respond part. Their question was, how long do you have to wait before it's too late?
In terms of the survivor goes, or are you as an advocate?
Let's go both. I like answer for both.
Was never too late to, as a survivor, to come forward and share information. Like you're going on what your comfort is. I've seen ladies with files about as thick as phone books, and they keep constantly coming back. But every time they come back, they take away a little bit of more information, right? They build up more self-esteem. So as a survivor, it is never too late to come and seek help. Like we really want that to be stressed. Like it's not like, okay, yeah, he abused me 2 weeks ago, and so it's been too long now. The police said I can't file a report, so I shouldn't be able to seek any services. That's not true. If it happened to you years ago, if it happened to you yesterday, if it happened to you a month or two ago, come and seek services. It is never ever too late. As far as advocates go, we want to, again, we're going to exercise patience and kindness and grace and mercy and all those things when we're working with survivors, because we want them to still come back. We still want to have those open lines of communication. So whether that takes them a few days, whether that takes them a few months, whether that takes them a year to actually come forward and share everything, we're still going to be patient. We're still going to welcome them in. We're still going to treat them as if this is the first time I've heard this story, right? So everybody gets a brand new slate. I truly believe that when they come through any program.
Awesome, thank you for that. Okay, we have one of these questions come up. What are suggested ways to deal with feelings like frustration, sadness, and worry of not being able to help others because they aren't willing to be helped?
Yeah. Yeah. The constant reminder for me, and it took me a while to draw up boundaries. Because again, I'm a fix-it person. Like, I want to rescue people. I want to fix problems. I want to be a solution giver, right? For me, I found, and this has been sort of the repeat for advocates, especially over the last few years, is that their story is not my story. I think that's what helped shift things. And if you're experiencing vicarious trauma, and we talk about burnout, and those are sort of the words that come up frequently when you're an advocate, when you're anybody who has to listen to trauma. You get all those secondary trauma, you get vicarious trauma, you have extreme burnout. Burnout does not happen overnight. It's not like yesterday I heard like this really horrific event that happened, and then tomorrow I am burnt out. That's not how it happens. It's a gathering over a period of time of all these traumatic these trauma things that happen, and we hear and we absorb, that build up to this moment where, wow, I cannot function. I have no motivation to do the work that I'm doing. I have no emotion as far as, and I've experienced burnout. For those that have experienced burnout, you wake up one day and you say, I have no feeling. I have no sympathy. I have no empathy. I have nothing to give. It's a very exhausting place to be. It's a very hard place to dig out from. So my suggestion before you hit that point is to get a good group of people around you. I highly encourage therapy because I think it works as long as you work it. It's like 12 steps, right? Like, it works if you work it. So you really got to put the time in, and you really got to be honest. You have to look at yourself through a magnifying glass and really share with somebody who doesn't know you at all. Sometimes it's kind of freeing to share everything, because once you say it and you let it be there out, and it came out of your mouth, you have to let it go. I think a lot of us want to still hold on to it, and I don't know why. Like, we still want to think about it. We still want to keep a hold of it, but it doesn't serve us any good to keep holding on to these things. So anything you can do, any activity that is not work, and keeping in mind that their trauma is not your trauma. Their story is not your story, because once you leave your four walls of your office, of your space, you get to go home. You get to be with your kids. You get to be with your family. You get to be with your pets, your fur babies, right? You get to be with those that you love. You get to be around the things that you love, the things that bring you comfort and joy. So being an advocate makes you really examine what are the important things in your life, but having clear boundaries is going to help you, to the extreme. As a person who has experienced burnout, yes, you need to have clear boundaries.
Thank you. We have a pretty interesting question, I think. Do you ever have elderly married couples with domestic violence, and do women in this situation ever leave?
Yes, and yes. We see, some of my first early cases for court were for elderly couples, and extremely abusive, like not just presently, but over years and years, married, have kids, they have grandkids, and in extremely abusive relationships. Now, they do say that as you age, the abuse kind of sort of tapers off. I don't necessarily believe or subscribe to that. I think it just changes, right? Like, it just shifts to be something different. While it might have been highly physically abusive when they were much younger and first married or into the middle of their marriage, it could be that now it's more psychological. Now it's more emotional, and now it's more financial. It's all of those things. I don't think that ever. It's really again, like I love kids and old people. I don't know. People my age, I don't know. But kids and old people, I love them so much. My kupunas, I have the best conversations with them. But when they leave those relationships, there's some people just like people my age, they leave the relationship and they still want to go back because it's comfortable for them. But there's about a half of them that leave, and then they find life outside of that. They go stay with family, and they're cared for by family, and they feel loved by their family elsewhere outside of this abusive marriage relationship. So it does work, and we do see it a lot. So yes and yes to that question.
Okay, I think we may have maybe time for maybe 2 more questions. I'm just looking at the clock, and I want to honor everyone's time. Maybe, yeah, 2 more questions. So how do you help women who have been fired from a job due to her partner's abuse? Do you contact the employer since it's illegal?
No. So best way for them to go, I think, probably would be through like legal aid, because they can help them. They have specific programs within their organization that helps just for that. I reported people to the Better Business Bureau, but if you have ties to an attorney, they can help them, give them legal advice. But legal aid is a great place to go through. Yeah, because it's really it's so against the law, and for us, we would go that route, and we would encourage our survivors to do so.
Let's see. So you previously mentioned how victims are dependent on their abuser for money. Do you know of the state that provides any type of emergency funds or other organizations that have this type of emergency fund for victims who are trying to leave?
Yes. So our state has them. If you talk to any DV program here, we have, most of us have kind of a pool of money. When we do grants, sometimes grant providers are not as excited to give us funds for this, but if you just talk to any organization, we can find a connect. If they're looking for flights to flee off this state, one of the good resources for us has always been the coalition. But that's if funds are available, right? And it all depends on funds. But if they're looking for like financial support and all those things, we can help them navigate systems. All DV programs will assist with that. So it's just a matter of contacting. Each state has their own thing. But during COVID, programs got extra money to help with other things. So we were able to support a lot of people. But yeah, that's a good question. So call your DV provider.
Sorry, one more. I think we can have time for one more. This question I popped up and I think is really great. How do you handle a victim who provokes her abuser? Telling her abuser, I'm going to take the kids, find another parent, dad, yada, yada. But like, it sounds like they're provoking. What would you discuss with the victim?
Yeah. So again, Hawaii, we got a bunch of tittas, and they're gonna say and do things that maybe aren't the safest things for them to do. But if one person is trying to gain power and control, if what they're doing is they want to, and it could be, right, we talked about situational and domestic violence, like it could be more situational. And so if their intent is to harm the other party with attempts to gain control, or take the kids away to control them, or to go through, and make threats in such a way, like we want to encourage them, like, hey, that's still not okay. Just because, you want to then gain the control in the situation doesn't make it right also. So we want to encourage them, like, if you're done with this relationship, or if he is done with this relationship, then you need to take steps to kind of make that process happen. But we need to encourage them that is still not okay. Just because you're the victim, it doesn't, and you want to retaliate, that doesn't constitute retaliation, right? Like, you shouldn't, violence does not begin violence, right? Like, you can't quell violence with violence. So we encourage them to just process that, have us help you process what's happening, but do it the right way, and not through violence. Because we're not going to promote violence for you. I mean, yeah.
You're right. It's like the tittle way in us. Thank you. This energy. Anyways,
Yeah.
for those who brought up questions, we have captured them all. I'm sorry we didn't get to have enough time to go through them, but we did see some of those questions that might actually overlap with our other trainers for the next 2 weeks. So we'll make sure to bring those up in the next 2 sessions. But just again, want to say mahalo to Sanoe for coming back with to us and presenting to us again today. And here's her email. But if folks are interested in your slides and stuff, we'll be able to present share that with those folks who joined us today, as well as the recording of today's session. So did you want to leave off anything before I kind of close us up?
No, I just want to say thank you all for being patient, and I say a lot of words, so please contact me if you want to talk more. I am definitely open for a conversation again. So, but thank you, Maka, and thank you for DOH and everybody else who has put this training together. I hope you guys have an excellent 2 other sessions ahead of you folks. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you again to you, Sanoe, and to the team in the background that's been really helping put this training series together. Again, 2 more sessions coming up this Friday as well as next week Friday. For those who have joined us, yes, in our Mahalo email, I will be sharing the slides with you folks, as well as the YouTube links to the clips that Sanoe has shared with us today. For those, have a great rest of your day. Oh, I don't know why I'm pinning you. Have a great rest of your day. Thank you for all of your work that you do in advocacy and domestic violence prevention. And I look forward to having you join us on another webinar. Mahalo, everybody.